ready with me to go to a networking event while we talk about how to get on podcasts as a guest. Bear with me. I don't do these like makeup things very often, so just bear with me while I do this. So let's talk about why you would want to be a guest on a podcast. Well, it's a great way to leverage someone else's audience in order to grow your own and to sell your products and your services. Podcasts have a huge ROI. Podcast audiences are incredibly loyal. When they develop a relationship with a host, so they're listening to this host week after week, they trust that host and they trust that whoever that host brings on is good. They're giving value. And so when a podcast host has you on their show, it's a huge endorsement to the audience. Now, 60% of podcast listeners say that they have purchased a product or a service because they heard about it on a podcast. And to get on a podcast is usually free. There are some shows that will charge you to appear on the show, but usually it's free. So all you're doing is giving your time and your knowledge in exchange for business. I mean, it's pretty good on the business owner's end. What I'm saying is not revolutionary. And if you haven't been aware of this, well, now you are. But because people are aware of this, this is what I really want to talk about this morning is I get pitched every single day, multiple pitches for people wanting to come on my show. Now, my show has done extremely well. I rank in the top 1% worldwide, and that's pretty good. So that means I get lots of emails every single day from people wanting to appear on my show and get in front of my audience. Most of them I don't even open. Most of them don't get past the subject line in my inbox. So I might read the subject line, but I'm not going any further. Actually, the subject line is really boring and I just ignore it because it's easily ignored. Let's say I open the email. Like I opened a few this morning and already, right now it's about 8 a.m. when I'm recording this, and I have already had at least 6 in my inbox. 6 that I noticed, that I opened. None of them had the one thing I'm looking for. I look for one specific thing. Well, you might be able to say it's 2 things, but I'm looking for something really specific. And none of them had this. And all of them had the thing that's going to turn me off the fastest. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for a story. I don't want to have to use my imagination and think about why you would be a good guest on my show. I want you to lay it out for me. Tell me the story. Don't tell me your credentials. That's important. But don't tell me about your brag sheet. That is important too. Don't get me wrong. I need to know you're credible. But the number one thing I care about is the story. And not your origin story, not your coming up story, but the story that we are going to tell together on my show that's going to give my audience value. You have to lay it out for me why you will be a good guest. And the reason you'll be a good guest is not because you have coached Fortune 500 companies, not because you have made 7 figures in your business, not because you came from nothing and now you're a big success. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to be very specific. And here's why I said we could break it into 2 things. It's the story, but it's not any story. It's a specific story that's unique to you. You need to have a unique value proposition when you're pitching to me, and I'm going to guess other podcast hosts agree. Something different. Here's what I see a lot of that's going to guarantee you won't be on my show and I'll stop reading the email. If you do exactly what I do. So if you are a performance coach, I'm not bringing you on my show. If you're a performance coach who's talking about overcoming imposter syndrome and building confidence and working with business leaders, and that's what I talk about. I don't need you for that. And it's not a competition thing. It's not like I'm worried you're going to come on and steal my audience. I can do that on my own. I don't need you for that. So if you are a coach, here's a little tip for coaches. If you're a coach and you want to get onto people's podcasts, don't go on other coaches' podcasts who coach in the exact same area that you coach on. Look for something different. because I have brought coaches on. I've had health coaches on. I come from a background in fitness and nutrition, but I don't do that anymore. So I bring on other people to talk about those things. I just spit a bit. Don't offer the thing that the coach or that the podcast host already does. I'll give you an example of where this did work for someone. I had a hypnotherapist on my show. I am a hypnotherapist, but she combines hypnotherapy with kinesiology. I'm not a kinesiologist. I thought this was fascinating, and she works with the same people that I do. She works with business owners who are scaling and growing a business. Exact same audience, but a completely different approach. I was curious about what she does that's so different. And because the two of us had that synergy, we're both hypnotherapists, we could have a really good, intelligent, deep conversation about it. But she was bringing something, a perspective, an angle that I don't do. So that was a great fit for my show and my audience, and that episode performed very well, which means my audience also enjoyed it. When you're pitching to podcasts to be on the show, yes, your credentials, your background, that's all important, but the most important thing is give us a story, a unique perspective, an angle that we can work with. I don't want to do work. I don't. I have enough work to do. If I had to look at every single pitch that comes my way and figure out on my own, what is the story? What is the angle? Why should this person be on my show? I would be spending all day long on someone else's social media platform, analyzing it, reading through all their posts, listening to their podcast if they have one, reading through all their blogs, analyzing their website, reading through their testimonials, going through everything I could find online to try to figure out, why would this person be on my show? That's your job. You have to tell me why. And the why is not because you've accomplished X, Y, and Z. That's not interesting. I'll give you a very specific example. I had someone pitch to be on my show who, ironically enough, teaches people how to pitch to be on podcasts. Yeah. And when I asked him to send me his one sheet, because he didn't pitch actually, he just reached out to me in my DMs and said, hey, I think I should be on your show. And I said, well, send me a one sheet. A one sheet is simply all the information about you. It should have your story, your background, your credentials. It should give me everything I need to know about why you should be on my show. And I just assumed he would have one because he teaches people how to get on podcasts. I thought he'd have a one sheet. He didn't have a one sheet. He said, oh, I don't do that, Terry. That's just a sheet bragging about who I am. And I said, okay, not a problem. Here's a Google form you can fill out instead, which is what I send to people who, might make a good guest on my show. And it asks for the same information that would be on a one sheet. So I said, here, fill this out. And he said, Terry, no, I'm not going to fill out your form. And then he sent me a bunch of voice messages with his bragging about himself. So he didn't want to send the one sheet because it was bragging, but he did send a bunch of voice messages bragging. He was like, all you need to know, Terry, is that I'm a former U.S. veteran. So he fought in the military. He runs ultra marathons. And then his third thing was that he ranks in the top 1% of all podcasts. That was it. Now, those things are impressive, but when I break it down, I rank in the top 1% of podcasts. If I'm going to bring someone on to talk about that, well, I'm going to talk about it. I know how to get there. I've helped other podcasts get into the top 5, 3, 2, and 1% of podcasts. I know this. Let's talk about the fact that he's a veteran. My husband's a police officer. I have police officers in my life. I have veterans in my life, people who have fought in wars. And if I want to talk about that, I have people who I have a close relationship with. Or if I want to talk about PTSD from first responders or military, I have people in my direct circle who I can bring on to talk about those things. And I would more likely go to them first. And then the ultra marathons, I was a personal trainer. I trained high-level athletes. I have people in my world that I can contact if I want to bring on an athlete. I had Leah Goldstein on my show, who is one of the most phenomenal athletes I've ever encountered, who talked about her race across America that she has accomplished, I think, 3 times now, and she's won it. Like, like, no offense to him. That's great that he's done those things, but that doesn't put a story together for me. Like, there was no story. There was nothing interesting about it. These were all topics I could cover with people in my circle that I already know. Long story short, in summary, if you want to get on a podcast, and certainly if you want to get on my podcast, you need to present me something unique, a unique story, a unique proposition, a unique angle. And don't lead with your credentials, although they are important. I care about that. You need to be credible and know what you're talking about. But don't lead with that. Don't think that that's enough to sell you, especially if you're a coach. No offense, but I'm about as certified as a coach can be. So that's not gonna excite me. If you come at me saying that you are a hypnotherapist, I'm a hypnotherapy trainer. If you come at me that you have trained in NLP, I'm an NLP trainer. So that's no offense, but that's not going to excite me. I can talk about those things all day long, and probably better than you can. Not to sound arrogant, but that's just the truth of it. So if you want to get onto podcasts, dial in your story. That is the most important thing. And again, not your origin story, not your why story, but the story that we are going to tell together on my show that's going to make you valuable to my guests. And think about that. Put the guests at the center of it. What are they going to learn that's going to make their lives better or their businesses better? Here's a pitch that I did really like. I had someone approach me recently. Actually, it was a referral from another podcast guest. Referred this guest to me and said, I think this person will be really good on your show. Can I make an introduction? I said, absolutely. So we have an introduction email. We get on an introductory call. Normally I don't do that, but because I knew nothing about him, I wanted to have an introductory call. So we get on this intro call and he says to me, Terry, I'm in real estate. I've been in real estate for 20 years. I don't want to come and talk about real estate. No one wants to hear that. Hallelujah. He gets it. And I said, great. I'm happy to hear that. What will we talk about? If you come on the show, what are we going to talk about? And he said, client relationships. And I said, tell me more about that. What about client relationships? And I'm not going to give it away because this is what's going to be on the show. But he talked about it from a perspective I haven't heard of before. And he talked about the evolution of the client relationship and how things that we were doing even just a few short years ago don't work in today's world. That is compelling. That's interesting. That is something my audience can listen to, take something from, and apply it in their business. And that's what I mean by a story. That's the story we will tell together when he comes on my show. If you want to get onto podcasts and you want to do this well, and you want to use podcasts to grow your audience, grow your business, you need to do these things. Oh, and the other thing that won't get you on my show is if you harass me. If you are constantly messaging me and then following up every day, and I'm not dissing the follow-up. Follow-up's important. I get busy. Sometimes I see a good pitch and I forget to respond. But if your follow-ups sound like, hey, Terry, I'm just going to assume that you don't want to hear from me again because I didn't hear back from you yesterday, that's an immediate rejection. And you won't hear back from me. I'm just going to ignore you from now on. Don't shame the host. Don't bully us. Don't try to pressure us. The thing that we care about the most as hosts is delivering value to our audience. So you have to demonstrate to me that you're going to bring value. That's it. It's simple, but not easy. So do your homework first. Oh, and speaking of homework, actually listen to the podcast before you pitch. Listen to more than one episode. Because one of the pitches I got this morning, and I get these every single day that sound just like this, was I listened to your recent episode about blank, 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 and I really appreciate how you touched on X, Y, and Z. And as soon as I read it, I know they got that from the show notes. They didn't listen to the episode. So tell me something about the episode you liked personally, Tell me something that you related to. Tell me something specific that's not in the show notes, because I don't give a lot away in my show notes. Otherwise, why would you listen to the episode, right? You could just read the show notes. So don't get your information about the host from the show notes. We know when you do that, by the way. We know. We know what we wrote in those show notes. We know. Do better than that. I used to get pitches before I did guest interviews. My first 3 years of podcasting, it was strictly a solo show. And then I started bringing on an occasional guest. And before I brought on any guests, I would get pitches of people saying, you should have this, they'd be agents, and they would say, you should have this person on your show because of the other great guests you've had on. And we really like the guests you have on your show, and this person would be a natural fit. I'm like, guests? Clearly, they weren't doing their homework because I didn't have any guests on my show. And don't think I'm too big of a person that I didn't reply back to these people and say, that's strange because I've never had a guest on my show. So which guests have you heard? I don't do that anymore. I hope that helps you. Think about how you're pitching to podcast hosts to get on their shows, because the reality is we want guests, but we want good guests. And we don't want to have to do the homework. We have a show to create and produce. We don't have time to research you. We will research after we're interested. That's a different ballgame. But I'm not gonna put together a whole story and a whole concept for an episode before I even know that you're interesting to me. You prove to me you deserve to be on the show, that you're going to bring something unique, and we're going to create a great episode together. Bring that to me. And then I will do the research on you once I'm like, yes, this person's cool. Then I will research you and I will read your book. I'll read your blogs. I'll listen to other podcasts you've been on. I will go through your website. I will go through your social media with a fine-tooth comb, and I will create a great episode for us. But you have to do your work. Just basically, don't be lazy. Don't be boring. That's all we ask. Don't be lazy. And don't be boring. All right. Have a great day. Bye.